So, you want to shoot video as a beginner but you don't know where to start? It can be daunting at first since there's so much to learn and it's so different from photography. But in today's world of content creation, video skills have never been more important to have under your belt. So here are the 4 most important tips to get you started. First tip, and the one that I cannot stress the most, the one that is arguably most important, and the one that if you take anything away from today's video, it should be this, and that is to make sure you nail it in camera. Now this sounds super basic and super straightforward, but believe me, once you start getting a little bit more fluent and a little bit more confident in Premiere Pro, Final Cut, or whatever you edit your videos in, you can start to rely on your editing, which is great, but it also causes a huge problem, and it's bitten me in the ass many times, and that is when you're out shooting, you kind of just say, oh, I'll fix it in post. Oh, I'll fix it in post. Oh, I won't punch in. Oh, I won't shoot in 4K. I just zoom in a little bit later. Oh, I won't make sure my exposure is correct. I'll just color grade it out. This kind of stuff and this mindset will absolutely ruin you as a video creator. So if you're just a beginner getting started, or even if you're an intermediate or a pro by this stage, please nail it in camera. I'm sure you may have heard this in other videos, but it is so crucial to nail it in camera, believe me. It also just generally speeds up the whole editing process, which is never a bad thing. Less time spent behind your computer editing means more time out shooting. Alright, so we've just arrived at this place called Karamis Beach, and it's a very famous surf spot, and unfortunately there's like no shade here at all, given why I'm in this very strange kind of area. I don't even know how to describe it. Anyway, moving on to tip number 2, point number 2 that I wanted to cover, and that is to make sure your shutter speed is always double your frame rate. So, for example, if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, you should be shooting 1/60. If you're shooting in 60 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/125. Now, chances are you've heard this tip before, and I'd like to kind of show you just a little bit of what the shutter speed does, because in all honesty, I don't play by these rules all the time. If it's really low light and I don't want to fill my image with noise, I'll just slightly turn down the shutter speed just a little bit from double. And if it's really bright and my ND filter either doesn't make it all the way or I just don't have it on me, I will simply crank up the shutter speed just a little bit. In all honesty, it doesn't make that much of a difference, especially if you're shooting for YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram. It's good to keep in mind, and it's a really good practice to, I guess, practice, but nonetheless, you can kind of bend these rules just a little bit. Anyway, it's very hot here. Like I said, there's no shade, so we are just in the sun cooking. We're about to go get breakfast, because God, I could go for a water, a drink, a juice, whatever right now. I'm sweating buckets. Nice little local spot for breakfast just by the beach. This is honestly why I love Bali so damn much. Well, I know it's quite loud here. We just made it to Tegununung Waterfall, and I'm just gonna cover tip number 3 quite quickly because it's only a small tip. And that is to make sure you're shooting everything in manual. Manual exposure, manual settings, manual white balance, and if you're not shooting yourself like this, manual focus. And this is so nothing changes halfway through your shot. You're not taking a nice slow-mo shot and all of a sudden the focus changes, or your white balance changes out of nowhere because your camera thinks the whole scene has changed, or the absolute worst, your exposure changes, and that's just very hard to fix in post. Make sure you're shooting things in manual. Don't try and take any shortcuts here. Believe me, it's so worth it, and you don't want to ruin any of your shots. Last but not least, you want to make sure your video has a consistent flowing motion. The biggest way to stand out as a beginner is to change up the flow of your shot. For example, let's say you're doing a simple push-in shot. As you're moving forward with the camera, you don't want to start to pan left or pan right or change up the direction or flow of the shot at all, because this way it's harder for the viewer to understand what the shot is achieving, or how it's kind of adding to the story, and really what the shot is about in general. So you'll see this with beginner drone flyers the absolute most, when they're flying straight forward and then they'll just make a hard left turn or a hard right turn. You really want to avoid this at all costs, because this will make you stand out as a beginner the most. By all means, change it up and get a stack of different shots, but just make sure you complete the first one, the second one, and the third one individually, instead of trying to get them all in one shot. Nonetheless, guys, that is gonna wrap up today's video. Regardless if you're a beginner or a pro, it's always nice to kind of refresh your skills or understand how someone else is kind of, I guess, looking at things in a different perspective. But anyway, if you liked today's video, leave a like down below. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below as well. If you're new around here, subscribe. And as always, guys, I will catch you in the next one. Peace.